Okay, can you also like click OK on that on the PC? Thank you. You have to do it on the PC as well. Great. So maybe a thumbs up in the class so people can hear us. Do you see thumbs up in the back? Yeah? You're good? Can you hear us? Yes, no? 1, 2. Samuel, you muted yourself.
Sorry, can you say something?
So can you hear me? If you can, thumbs up. No?
They can hear you. They can hear you.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's get started then. Sorry guys, I'm not here. Or not there. I'm here but not there. I'm in Arizona for a conference. So unfortunately I couldn't be there. But Samuel is helping with setting up the Zoom. So hopefully we can do some good presentations. So the goal of today's presentations are for you to kind of learn the latest and greatest for cache side channels. So the first few papers are going to be about the attacks, and then the next few papers are going to be about the defense. A few things to clarify. First of all, you have to submit feedback reviews. There is no particular deadline for it, but try to do it as soon as possible. You can choose whatever papers you want to submit a feedback. But hopefully, I'm assuming that some of you are going to choose these papers, so you can submit feedbacks here. You should also submit paper reviews. These are separate from the feedbacks. You have to do 3 for this week. The deadline was just now, so the deadline has passed, but I'm going to give you until the midnight to submit the reviews if you didn't. But just keep in mind that whenever there is a paper presentation, you have to submit the, your paper reviews at that, like right before the class. For MSOL students, you don't need to submit reviews for in-class presentations. You have to submit reviews for MSOL, other people who submit their MSOL presentations. I can also clarify these in a separate post on CampusFire. Okay? Hi, Jacob. Welcome to the class. It's my spirit in the class today. Yeah. All right. Okay. So, and then Samuel put the meeting ID on the Blackboard. Whoever is presenting, please join there and then start presenting. Make sure that you're mute. And then, so there is no feedback. But I think we can start with the first group. Can the first group come up and start presenting?
Let me see you looking at us from like here. Is there a camera? Is there a camera? How do you know Jacob came in?
There's a camera.
I see a camera. I see you, Jackie.
How many reviews do we have to submit? Like
you have to submit 3 reviews. 3.
For today?
Yes.
Okay.
The feedback.
Yeah, sorry, the feedback.
The feedback is total of 8 for the entire quarter. So you can choose whatever you want to submit those.
Okay.
So we share our screen on Zoom, right? Okay.
Yes, yes, please. There you go. Thank you.
Do you have your phone, Jackie? Or I can type too.
Okay.
So and then guys, 10 minutes, okay? So don't go over.
Yeah, we got you. We'll be under.
All right. Sounds
Wait.
good. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Wait, so I'll be doing the slides, right?
Oh, just say your name.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Jason Wu.
I'm Miriam.
And I'm Jacqueline, and today we're going to be presenting on synchronization storage channels, or S²C. So to start off with a high-level overview of the problem statement.
Wait, sorry.
Just kidding.
There we go.
To start with a high-level overview of the problem statement. So modern CPUs are increasingly vulnerable to microarchitectural attacks, especially due to shared caches that allow one person to spy on another, or one process to spy on another. And then most traditional side channel cache attacks depend heavily on precise timing measurements to detect whether a cache has been accessed or evicted. But what if an attacker doesn't have access to high resolution timers? Well, the goal of this paper is to develop a timerless, user space accessible side channel on modern CPUs, specifically focusing on Apple M1. The timerless attacks are rare and require special privileges often and deprecated hardware features, and existing LLSC or load linked store conditional synchronization primitives are underexplored, and this paper aims to bridge that gap. So I'm going to provide some background on LLSC on Apple M1. So if you take a look at the graphic in the middle, when the LL address is cached in private L1 and there is no data race that occurs, SC will always succeed. If you take a look at the graphic on the right side, if the address is evicted from private L1 to shared L2 or other low-level caches, even without a data race to this address, SC will fail deterministically. So in other words, a key observation here is that LLSC can only monitor addresses in L1. But in theory, LLSC should succeed if there's no data race that occurs. But in the application of Apple M1 specifically, researchers found that LLSC will fail due to microarchitectural reasons, i.e. L1 evictions. So another key observation that researchers found that LLSC is a good microarchitectural state to architectural state converter. Specifically, LLSC can translate whether an address is cached into L1 into a simple architecturally visible outcome or the return value of the SC instruction. However, there are still a couple challenges that we have to address if we want to achieve cross-core cache attacks. The first one is that LLSC only monitors addresses in private L1, or it only monitors one address at any given time. But in order for an attack to be cross-core, we have to obtain some degree of observation over the shared L2 cache state. And ideally, we want to be able to monitor multiple addresses at the same time. And if you're able to manage both challenges, then the result that we achieve is synchronization storage channel, or S²C, which Jason will go over in his next few slides.
All right, so now that we understand the background, let's take a concrete look at the main contributions of this paper. In this work, they present S²C, an attack where a single threaded program is going to be executing LL and SC commands on its own private data. But it can actually see SC failures due to cache evictions that arise from another program that can potentially be running on another core. To accomplish this, they performed a detailed reverse engineering of the M1's L2 cache that enabled monitoring of shared L2 evictions with the LL as well as SC commands. So first, they reverse engineered the M1's L2 cache to be able to figure out how to conduct their attack more efficiently. The first critical factor that they discovered was that the L2 cache is going to be inclusive. Inclusive in this case means that data that's present inside L1 is likewise going to be included within L2. However, this means that when a piece of memory is going to be evicted from the L2 cache, it will likewise also be evicted from L1. The consequence of having an inclusive cache is that changes to the shared L2 can potentially actually have a difference on a particular core's private L1, which can cause security problems. In addition, they also discovered that the M1 chip leverages a phenomenon known as auto-locking. Auto-locking is where data that's present in both L1 as well as L2 is given higher priority in terms of evictions over data that is only present within L2. In the figure on the right, you can see that X1 is in both L1 as well as L2. So X1 is going to be auto-locked. This means that in terms of L2 evictions, we'll be evicting X2 all the way to X12 before we even touch X1. This is going to cause some complications for our attack. If X1 is the address that we're monitoring and we expect it to be evicted when the victim is running their program, due to auto-locking, however, when the victim runs their program, they will actually not evict X1, and rather they'll actually evict the non-auto-lock data, as we can see here inside the cache diagram. In the paper, I won't elaborate too much on this, but the authors devised a clever way to make sure that all the data that they add as their eviction set into the L2 cache is going to be auto-locked. Since everything is auto-locked, that implies that nothing is going to be auto-locked and the attack can proceed as normal. So moving forward, here's a quick description of the attack that they conduct. First, they're going to fill the L2 cache with their auto-lock eviction set and monitor one particular private address with their LL command. In the second step, they wait for the victim program to run and potentially evict the address that they're looking at. Afterwards, they'll employ SC to check the memory. If SC succeeds, that means the victim did not access the data, and this corresponds to a cache hit. If SC fails, however, that means the victim did access the data and it kicked something out, and this corresponds to a particular cache miss. So essentially, we can see here that SC kind of emulates what we would be using for a typical timer-based attack. We'll be taking a look at cache hits or cache misses. And in this paper, they would actually extend to monitoring multiple cache lines through the construction of something called a microarchitectural weird circuit. To quickly go over the evaluations, they conducted these evaluations on an M1 Mac Mini, where the attacker is assumed to be single-threaded with no timer access and with no greater privileges. They also evaluated some multi-cache access as well as practical attacks, which Miriam will be going over now.
So the results were evaluated in 3 areas. The first was monitoring multiple L2 cache sets. With the help of the microarchitectural weird circuit that Jason mentioned, they were able to monitor up to 11 target addresses simultaneously with up to 93 or with at least 93% accuracy. To compare though, timer-based attacks can theoretically monitor hundreds of sets simultaneously, so scalability is definitely a weakness of this particular attack. The second was establishing a covert channel. They were able to get a bandwidth of 185 kilobits per second with 98.5% accuracy. Again, in comparison, Prime and Probe, which is a timer-based attack, had about double the speed with over 99% accuracy. Finally, we have encryption key extraction. The typical comparison metric for this is the duration of the first round attack, which they were able to achieve 100% accuracy with 300K encryption calls, which takes about 1 second. This is a little bit slower, but similar to that of timer-based attacks like Flush and Flush and Prime and Scope. So to summarize all these comparison points, although this attack is unique because it doesn't require a timer and it is specifically designed for the Apple M1 architecture, it is a lot less scalable and generally slower than that of timer-based attacks. So this research has a few implications for future work. This paper already explicitly says that it also works on the M2 chip as well as the M1 chip, but it'd also be good to know if it works on the M3 and M4, as well as other ARM-based processors that have the load linked and store conditional instructions. Similarly, there is still work to be done in finding mitigations for these kinds of attacks. Other related research areas are, other timerless side channel attack methods in general, which I actually think the next paper is also a timeless attack, and also other attacks just on Apple Silicon. I did a quick search and I found these papers that were published just this year about attacks on the M3 and M4 chips called Slap and Flop. These are not timerless attacks, but still knowing the security vulnerabilities of these chips that I use, and I'm sure many of you also use, is an important area of research. And finally, we have our discussion points. I'm not super sure how these are supposed to go, but the first question is, how can we mitigate the risk posed by load-linked store conditional instructions at the software, ISA, and/or hardware levels?
Anyone have any ideas or want to answer this question?
I guess change the synchronization so what it does not change, it no longer indicates anything on an L1 cache eviction.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good idea where like it kind of shows that something is missing in the L1 cache, which could potentially be used to leak that sort of information.
Yeah. I guess it's
Is not using them an option? Not using no.
Yeah, like an ISA, for example, could just completely eradicate the load linked store conditional instructions or just like replace them with equivalent but safer instructions. Okay, we'll just move to the next question. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of timerless side channel attacks compared to attacks that use timers? This one is hopefully more obvious.
Is it that we can essentially know for certain whether or not it's like 0 or 1 for the message instead of timings where we have to like depend on that we get very accurate timing for those signals?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah.
Anything else?
You can see if anyone has any questions from the audience.
That's true. Yeah. So do you want to answer the question again too?
I was gonna say that you could argue that like not all systems have access to high precision timers, especially at the user level. At the same time, you could argue that having this particular bit isn't exactly like a widespread thing, but at least for this set of architectures, it seems to be like less assumptions are necessary. Assuming you have the assumption that you're running on an M1.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess just like, general questions.
Yeah.
Did they ever go into like how they actually were able to get the 11 sets to work simultaneously?
Yeah, that was the microarchitectural weird circuit. I don't know why they call it that, but it's basically just like its own little piece that they kind of like add on to manipulate the bits. I think they did something called like, it was like pointer racing or something where they have like multiple pointers and then if like one of them misses, then it kind of amplifies the time delay. And from that, they're able to tell like when a miss happens.
Got it.
Yeah, so the microarchitecture of weird machine is actually a technical term. It's a term that kind of like you can use some instructions to cause some side channels behavior. So that's why they call it that way.
Yeah, I have a question about like the thread model. Because the thread model assumes that you're running an M1 chip on like what I think it was a Mac Mini or something.
Mhm.
And then they said they're running Asahi Linux. And I'm like, is that
They say in the paper that it doesn't work on like the normal Mac
it
OS.
doesn't work?
Yeah,
So in practice, is this actually like, do we know how many people are really running Asahi Linux?
okay, look, okay, wait, okay, chill, okay. It's meaningful because it proves that it can happen. And you should be mindful of it.
Right, like, obviously there's value.
Okay, there we go.
Like there's this notion of how we the interface is.
Yes.
So personally, like my opinion of this paper is that their particular result, like their methodology is meaningful and important, but I feel like their particular results are a little bit questionable.
Your interpretation is valid.
Oh. Good therapist.
All right, I think that's it for us. Yeah, thank you everyone for your attention.
Yeah, I mean, follow-up question definitely can be asked in Campus Fire, guys. So the point of discussion points is that you can ask follow-up question on Campus Fire. Since we have limited time, we cannot obviously have like a long discussion, but definitely if you feel like you need to ask more questions, post it on Campus Fire and we can discuss further. Thank you
Thank
guys for the
you.
presentation. All right, who is next? Next groups. So to save some time, whoever is presenting can join Zoom a little bit earlier, so we don't have like you don't need to like wait or wait for you to join. Okay.
Wait, do I just join the Zoom?
Yes. Yeah. The meeting ID is on the blackboard.
Meeting password.
And then the next groups can also join the Zoom. Like whoever is supposed to present, just join the Zoom.
Well, I'll just see. Okay. I can do that. I ran away to this. No, the review. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I'm Audie. I'm Bhavik.
I'm Mark.
And the presentation that we're reviewing today is invalidate plus compare a timer-free GPU cache attack primitive. And we're group T 1.2. So the problem statement of this paper stems from the fact that GPUs are evolving. So if you go back like 10 to 15 years ago, GPUs were mostly just used for gaming. So they were sitting inside people's personal computers, and there's not really any critical information that people are using on the GPUs. However, in modern day, GPUs are now used extensively in data centers for doing things like AI, cryptocurrency, scientific computing, where the actual information that they're crunching on the GPUs could actually be like very critical. For example, like model weights or model structure of an AI model. And so not much is currently known about GPU security and vulnerabilities. For example, is it susceptible to common cache side channel attacks like those that are launched on the CPU? So the point of this paper is to understand what these GPU cache vulnerabilities are, understand the threat model and basically understand, is there a way we can mitigate these in like future GPUs and help the security of them so that when we're doing things like AI, cryptocurrency, or scientific computing, our data is safe from attackers. And so essentially, this kind of is very similar to the prime plus probe attack that we talked about in class, but instead of doing it on a CPU, we're doing it on a GPU. And more specifically, we want to figure out how to do steps 1 and steps 3 on the GPU. So step 1 is, filling an entire cache set with some attacker pages or attacker lines. And then step 3 is actually probing it to figure out if the victim accessed the cache and if the attacker's lines were evicted or not. Just some quick background on GPU architecture. On the top in circles X and Y, we have the SMs, which are kind of like the cores of the GPU, which have the whole pipeline for doing computation. And each SM has its private L1 cache, which is incoherent, meaning if SMX writes something to a cache line, SMY won't see that change reflected because of the incoherency. And below these L1 caches in the memory hierarchy is a shared L2 cache. And now because we have some shared piece of hardware, which is the L2 cache, we open up this system to some vulnerabilities in terms of security because of that shared hardware. And of course, we have the main memory. And now the authors of the paper identified one instruction that actually leads to this vulnerability called discard, which is kind of similar to like a flush instruction on the CPU, where essentially if we call discard on an address that's in the L2 cache, if that cache line is dirty, meaning it has some data written to it that hasn't yet been written to the main memory, it'll actually invalidate that data and it won't be written to main memory. On the corollary, if that dirty page is evicted from the L2 cache due to like a cache contention, that dirty line will be written to the main memory. And so this is kind of how the attack starts to get formed, specifically the probe part of the attack, where we can see that if we discard an instruction or if we discard an address in the cache, and we notice that the data was not written to main memory, that that address was not evicted before. However, if we discard it and we still see that that dirty line was written to main memory, we know that something evicted that before we were able to discard it. And so just an example of how the discard works, if we read 0 from our main memory, let's say X writes 2 to its L1 cache, and then we discard 2, it'll read 0. And so now that we open this side channel, we leave space for an attacker to come cat and read our data.
Yeah, so for the first contribution of this paper, since the NVIDIA architecture is like closed source, the authors had to like reverse engineer the cache's characteristics. And to do this, they leveraged this discard instruction as well as the L1 incoherence to reveal this cache hierarchy. And over here, you can see like the list of their discoveries. And the main two that motivate the attack are the fact that the context switches flush the L1, but not the L2 cache, which means like a victim context could leave some information in the L2 cache that an attacker context can take advantage of. And the fact that they found that to prime a cache set, they found that 7 stores and 9 loads achieves its goal. And then, yeah, for the invalidate compare attack primitive, they first prime the cache set with 7 stores and 9 loads. And then they detect a context switch, which allows like the victim to execute their program. And by the way they did this in the timerless approach was they had an SM basically increment a flag variable continuously. And the SM that's like monitoring all the cache sets would just set that flag variable to 0 and then just like wait for the flag variable to like not be 0. And basically when the victim context like executes, the L1 cache is auto flush, which means like the flag variable is like gone. And then when the our attacker context like comes back in, it tries to read the flag variable and it sees that it's like greater than 1 or greater than 0. So it can proceed with the next steps. And then for invalidate compare, we're just invalidating the address that we stored. And then if the value changed, basically that means like the victim accesses the cache set, which means we got some information. And to improve this attack, they found out that like all applications kind of use every cache set. So it's actually not valuable to know if a cache set was accessed, but if like how much a cache set was like contended for. So they improved this attack and they're able to like give you like a numerical value on how much a cache set was contended for, right? The advantages of this attack primitive is there's no reliance on timing. So some of the defenses for timing, like having like a constant time, are not available for this. And we're also able to like give you like a richer piece of data for the contention. And yeah, the first case study they did was on websites. So websites are mainly rendered through the GPU. And over here, you can see the cache contention intensity trace that they were able to get for every like website. And basically the x-axis is like the number of cache sets that they're monitoring, and the y-axis is like the time. So you can see like every website has like their own distinct like memory gram. that they refer to in this paper. And then for the second case study, they try to do this for the like a virtual keyboard. Like if you press like a keystroke, the screen kind of changes. So it gives you like a different memorygram that they're able to classify upon. And they try to do this on like a Ubuntu machine to like extract passwords when you type in the password to log into your machine. And yeah, and then for the evaluation methodology, all the attacker has to do is have like user level privileges on your machine, and you have to have like a modern NVIDIA GPU with the latest drivers. And the eviction set is constructed offline because all of like the whole drivers for NVIDIA are like contiguous physical page frames, and it's basically easy to do it offline. And this means like this is like a realistic threat model for all or for most modern NVIDIA GPUs. And for the measurement, there's hundreds of cache sets monitored, and the memorygram is collected 5 seconds over the sample. So like 5 seconds over the website. And then for classification, they use like a DenseNet 121 network with 5-fold cross-validation.
Yeah, so like Adi was saying, there were 2 main case studies for our paper. First one being website fingerprinting. And so using their DenseNet CNN, they were extremely accurate at predicting which websites were loaded, given it was in the training data set. But the only problem that arose was that updated page contents caused performance degradation, which we can see in the bottom right, that as time went on, the accuracy reduced to about 82%, but the top 3 stayed pretty accurate. And so this shows that the attack can reliably fingerprint websites over up to 7 days, but it doesn't consider the fact that in some cases, hardware context switches could add more noise to the attack. So that could be one thing to consider. And the next case study was virtual keystroke extraction. And so for letters and numbers, they achieved 67.3 to 77.3% accuracy. And it was even higher for just letters. And the heat maps show that certain letters are hard to classify, like this RTX 3060 right here in the middle. And it shows that overall, attacks can partially recover login passwords. And this could potentially have implications if you can infer what the missing like letters are. And one thing to note is that they tested on consumer GPUs, and they actually saw lower performance on the RTX 4060 because it had a larger cache size, meaning this attack might not work as well for server grade GPUs because they have a much larger cache size. And so future work could include reverse engineering the L2 address mapping, which this paper wasn't able to do completely, and that could allow for more efficient attacks. And they could also attack cloud virtualized GPUs, like over there, where many users are on top of a virtual machine and share the same hardware. And also this could be expanded to next generation NVIDIA, like the H100 or even AMD and Intel GPUs. And so, yeah, these are the thoughts for the discussion, and which we can discuss on Piazza. But if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Just curious with the virtual keystroke. Why do you think maybe the letters were harder to read than the numbers? Is it just because there's a variety of them, or?
I think that it had to do with the like actual storage in the cache sets. I'm not sure if the letters, I mean, these don't seem to be like harder to classify, but one thing to note is that when you're like differentiating between letters and numbers, you have like this @ symbol. So yeah.
Anyone else?
Thanks for the cat photo.
Yeah. You guys.
That's pretty cool. So I think one interesting thing about this paper is that, as I said in the class, these attacks are not just limited to CPU. It's actually going beyond and now being applied to GPUs, and soon going to be accelerators and so on and so forth. So it's important to know that, you know, it's not just limited to just one unit. It's actually across, because principles are the same. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right, next group.
Right on the middle.
What's going on?
I'm getting. You're getting it up? We are setting up still.
Okay, so one thing I realized is that when people asking questions, it's not very audible from microphone. So if you don't mind, please repeat the question and then answer it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Probably might want to be best to press next slide.
The audio's here.
It's right here, yeah.
I don't want to.
We can just move around as the
Yeah,
slides.
I can go over there.
All right, you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay. All right, so we're group T1.3, and we did our paper on sorry, we didn't do our paper, but we did our report on reload refresh, abusing cache replacement policies to perform stealthy cache attacks. And what exactly is the problem being addressed in this paper? When detecting side channel cache attacks, current protections look for the attacker evicting the victim's data. So tying this back into our lecture, as you can see, you'll have eviction sets coming in and saying to this data over here, hey, get out. But what if the attacker does not evict the victim's data? So by using this method, we're not evicting the data from the victim's cache. And so it's becoming undetectable to some of the current methods of monitoring attacks. Note, for this paper, this exploitation is of Intel cache replacement policies, specifically with its shared L3 cache or last level cache. So I showed you a little diagram over here where you can see L3 is shared, but then the other caches are not. So current defense tactics. As we went over in class, some like regular side channel attacks that we've come to expect is flush and reload, where the attacker will flush everything and then waits for the victim to access it. If it's, hits right away with low latency, then we know they access it and not they missed. And then prime and probe also is when the attacker VIX by timing is set. And then if there is a low latency, then we know that didn't access it high, that means they did. There was a miss. So based on those attacks, our current methods are basically as thus: time-based monitoring and hardware performance counters and transactional memory regions, just monitoring this to see. But when it sees lots of evicted data like prime and probe, that's what it's looking for, or lots of cache misses, that's flush and reload. It really tries to avoid those telltale signs in this kind of attack. So that's why it's going to be so hard to detect for our current methods of protection.
And now just an explanation of how this even works. Most of our detection methods, like Sarah mentioned, happen on like the LOC or the L3 cache. And this process sort of explains how this attack kind of bypasses that. So I won't go into the details too much, but it basically tries to look at the age of elements and it evicts the oldest element, the element that's like not the most used in the cache. And the idea is that there's basically, if you go to the next slide, there's intentionally like one block of the victim that's left out of the cache. And this kind of basically acts transparent to the L3 cache. So the detection systems that we had in place before for other kinds of attacks like prime and probe don't work. And I'll sort of go through the steps of the attack to explain that further. First is initialization. So target address is loaded into the cache and the attacker fills the cache set with addresses from the eviction set, but it basically excludes one of those addresses. And the idea is that if you load all of them, then the detection method could possibly know exactly what's happening. There's some kind of attack happening, but the wait stage is where this is exploited the most because the target isn't being accessed for that one particular address. There's going to be like a lowering of age that happens. And this basically triggers the reload process where there's a cache replacement happening by the attacker and the unused target or the target that is the highest age based on that previous algorithm I showed, that will get evicted. And everything else will stay in the cache. So after that, the attacker basically measures the time like in a lot of previous attacks we looked at. And a fast access means that data is still in the cache. After this, everything gets refreshed basically back to the previous state. So the detection methods that we use for like prime and probe and other attacks don't work because according to the victim process, everything looks basically the same. So yeah, this is the eviction algorithm that I just described. I won't go into detail, but basically everything is from the point of view of detection, basically transparent. So it's really hard on the L3 cache to be able to detect what's happening. So I'll just go into detail about what we can do for that.
So, yes,
Sorry.
or
Next slide.
So this is just a brief overview of the evaluation methodology that was used in the algorithm. So we're targeting mostly Intel chips and in multiple generations. Unfortunately, we didn't test too much on AMD and other chips. And victim applications, the primary ones we're focusing on are AES and RSA cryptographic operations. And in regard to the attack conditions, there's a shared cache environment with minimal system noise. So some of the main results of the reload and refresh. So first of all, the reload refresh, it avoids using the L3 caches and it completely evades detection systems. And this can cause some abnormal activity. And in addition, it's quite high effectiveness as it successfully steals the AES and RSA cryptographic keys. And it shows that there's no loss in attack power compared to traditional methods. It's also generally undetectable. Traditional methods generally fail to spot the attack of reload and refresh. And this causes causes like cache miss rates to fail to notice anything suspicious. There's also some low overhead as it doesn't create heavy traffic, so the victim performance is generally unaffected. So here are some of the future directions. Maybe we should monitor both L1 and L2 caches as well, not just L3. And of course, we should also maybe monitor this attack in other chips to maybe prevent future instances of this occurring, including the Apple M series and the AMD chips, in addition to the previously mentioned Intel chips. We could also build some caches with randomized replacement policies. This could make cache attacks much harder by removing the attacker's ability to for eviction order. We should also balance the performance, the cost, and the security in cache designs, as this might reduce space or increase complexity. These are a couple of discussion points for the class. So first of all, I was curious if maybe disabling features like KSM would prevent or significantly reduce the reload and refresh algorithm. That was one of the questions we had. If anyone wants to answer.
We're gonna.
Okay, so
Sorry, yeah.
could we also like design a cache that's maybe high performance and quite secure against side channel attacks? And in addition, could reload and refresh attacks leak some information that's inside a browser? So these were some of the discussion points I had while reading the paper.
Any questions?
Any questions?
There is none. Thank you, guys. Yeah. Any comments, questions? Okay. Thanks a lot. This is also another good example of why like just relying on one way of detecting these attacks may not work, right? Because the adversary can come up with other solutions, and that's another evidence that these attacks are very, very hard to predict and detect. Actually, thanks. That was a good presentation. All right, so we're gonna do one more, and then we're gonna have a quick break, and then come back and do the defenses. So, the force group.
I'm getting an invalid meeting ID.
For what?
Try to get.
Is it this one?
Yeah.
8101882955.
882955.
Mhm.
810188.
It's whatever is shown on that blackboard. Use that. Yep. There you go. Feel free to start whenever you're ready.
I see it.
Yep. I think I hear some back. Make sure that your audio is disconnected so that I don't hear the feedback from my own.
It's coming from your speakers, just mute it.
Okay.
Yeah, just mute your speakers. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Enoch.
I'm Siddharshan.
And today we're going to be presenting on adversarial prefetch. This was T1.4 paper. So the basic problem is that current existing cache attacks rely on evicting victims' data from the cache, so they're priming and flushing. And these attacks often rely on instructions such as seal flush and seal demote that can be made inaccessible to programs by making them privilege only kind of instructions, which would basically nullify the attack vector that comes with prime and probe attacks. And what are some alternative methods that we can come with and turn this into a game of whack-a-mole? And what we do is we can try to prefetch and byte that to evict the victim's data. Just a little background, we rely and assume that a computer is using the messy protocol of cache coherence. There's 4 states: modified, exclusive, shared, and invalid. A little bit messy. You guys can look into a little bit more. So the prefetch W instruction is the instruction that is primarily used in this attack. So the basic idea behind prefetching is that we move data from memory to the cache ahead of the access time, so that we can pay for the cost of the cache miss early rather than in the middle of the pipeline and cause like further delays and that kind of thing. So in prefetch W, it prepares the data for future writes by first taking the data from a shared lower level cache into the private cache, and then invalidating all the other copies and other cores, and then finally setting the state to modified. And by setting the coherent state to M, then we can more easily write with that core. And curiously, this works on read-only data in certain processors from a certain manufacturer. And this is important because shared data between attacker and victim is usually read-only. And by the fact that this works on read-only data, this opens up this kind of attack to be possible. So yeah, specifically with the modified and shared cache coherent state transitions that are crucial in this attack. For reading and writing data, let's say we have core 1 and we're trying to read some data. And if core 0 has the modified data, then when core is trying to read, it'll go to LLC. The shared LLC has to forward read to core 0, which is a modified, and then the whole thing will become shared. And also when core 0 is trying to write, then the LLC will have to send invalidation data to core 1 and to invalidate that shared copy, which all this takes extra time. And one crucial important idea is the idea of a remote cache, private cache versus LLC cache hit. And this is because, let's say we have core 1 trying to read. If the data is modified in core 0, then the read will have to go through the shared LLC to the private cache in core 0, and this is what we call a remote private cache hit. On the other hand, an LLC cache hit is when core 1 is trying to read and the data is already shared. So then when it reads, it just needs to read from the LLC. There's no need to forward to the core 0 modified, and this read takes a longer time compared to the remote private cache hit. So with these, they conducted some initial experiments, and the first one was to first prefetch some data and then read it. And they noticed that reads take longer on data that data from addresses that have been prefetched, which is the top red line in experiment 0, compared to data that has not been prefetched but is in red, which is experiment 1 here on this top graph. The second observation was that when reading data and then prefetch takes longer when it's called on data that has been read, which is this red line here, compared to data that has not been read, which is this number here. And this differences is due to the change of coherent state that's caused by reading and writing the prefetch, change of coherent state to modified, bringing change of coherent state to shared. So when you have situations where you need to change the coherent state, such as like reading versus prefetching, then that's what causes these time differences. And that drives these attacks.
So using these timing differences, you can create a covert channel And the assumption here is that the attacker and the receiver share some common library or some other read-only data. So for example, like a system library, they can be shared. So the attacker can look at how the shared library is accessed by the other thread. So the two techniques we'll cover are called prefetch and load and prefetch and prefetch. For prefetch and load, you have the sender basically called prefetch to set the cache line to M state as the bottom left picture. And then you have the receiver try to load that data. So if the load ends up being slower, it means that if the sender called prefetch, then the load takes longer because the cache line is in the modified state. But if the sender didn't call prefetch, then the cache line is shared, so it ends up returning faster. And that's how you can differentiate between a 1 and a 0. For prefetch and prefetch, you actually do the opposite, where the sender loads or doesn't load to set the cache line to shared or not shared. And if it's shared, then the prefetch instruction takes longer because it has to modify the state of the cache line from S to M. And that for certain CPUs take longer to do for some reason. For side channel attacks, it's the same assumption where you have shared libraries between the attacker and the victim, and techniques covered are prefetch and prefetch and reload. So for prefetch and prefetch, it's basically the same thing as a covert channel, but you just have the victim unintentionally become the sender. So whenever the victim loads some data, then the prefetch instruction takes longer to do. And for prefetch and reload, this one's a bit special in that the attacker has 2 separate threads running on 2 separate cores. So the first thread is to initialize the attack by calling prefetch and setting the cache line to M state. That's on the top diagram, and then the victim, and then the attacker waits for the victim to either access or not access the shared library. And if it accesses it, then the cache line becomes shared. So when the second thread called spy tries to load it, the shared cache line ends up returning faster compared to if it didn't.
Okay, so time for the experimental setup. How they tested it. Pretty simple. They'll be testing 3 different attacks. If we're keeping count, that's 2 side channel and 1 covert channel attack. Be testing different microarchitectures. So that's 2 desktop CPUs and 2 server CPUs, and the server CPUs use non-inclusive LSE, so might be a bit of a difference in how this attack works, and different CPU frequencies as well. And to test how good the attacks are, they'll test how fast the attacker can transmit data, which along with how reliable the transmission is, makes up channel capacity and how reliable is bit error rate, and can we use them to practically extract secrets. So those are my inside thoughts. So they tested square and multiply algorithm and keystroke timing. They extract both of those from these attacks. So these are the CPUs they tested. Not super interesting. Results wise, you can see the red line over there is the bit error rate. So after a certain transmission speed, the bit error rate just skyrockets. So there's kind of a very hard line of how fast data can be transmitted on this side / covert channel. And that was pretty consistent across all the CPUs. These are the speeds which, this kind of maxed out for each CPU. You can see over there, 822 kilobytes per second. That's like 6 megabits per second. Fun fact, that's actually sometimes faster than campus Wi-Fi. Pretty crazy. Results, square multiply algorithm, pretty accurate, like 96% accuracy. You can see in the graph there, pretty easy to tell what there is a square and what's multiply, so you can figure out the 1s and 0s as all these attacks do. Keystroke detection, if you type 1, 2, 3, 4, you might be typing it a lot faster. And basically all this is they attacked shared address in the shared library, which is involved in processing keystrokes. You can figure out exactly when the user pressed a key. This wasn't tested on the server CPUs because there's no GUI on those. And that was 100% accuracy. Very clear to see when a key is pressed. This attack can be even used during the transient window, bit of a class connection there, like the Spectre and Meltdown attacks. I'm going to go too much into that, but it was better than flush plus reload in the transient window. Versus the other attacks, it's a lot faster. And the reason why is that many other side channel attacks evict data to DRAM. But for this, it's a remote private cache hit for this instruction prefetch W is usually faster than a DRAM access. This wasn't really the case for the server processors because the private cache hit took a lot longer for those for some reason, microarchitecture wise. I don't know. Quick word from our sponsor, AMD. This attack doesn't work on AMD. AMD invented this instruction. Use code Natter at checkout. Try it, it might work. Future works. So basically I went through all the papers that cited this paper and just selected a few of them to talk about. Split them into two sections, new attack, new defenses. New attacks, there was a paper which investigated kind of a similar attack, but it worked like inter-CPU, and another paper by the same authors that used a different prefetch instruction that didn't actually rely on the existence of shared data. And all the papers I'm referencing will be put in the list at the end. And new defenses, it's a lot of ways to kind of mitigate against an attack like this. There's papers that talk about mitigating speculative execution cache-based attacks. One used AI to mitigate this stuff, that's kind of neat. One fuzzed the timer so that you can't get accurate timing, so it disrupts timing-based attacks. There's a paper that detects cache analysis via runtime trace analysis. Cache attacks via runtime trace analysis, so it just flags all these attacks before they can even execute. And another paper that defends against these code sharing attacks via hypervisor level monitoring. That's pretty interesting. Intel's got future work. They can check permissions before changing the coherence state like AMD does, and they can improve timing uniformity so they can make this instruction take the same amount of time to execute no matter what, which would prevent the covert channel. So that's the end. Discussion questions. So making this instruction check permission would make the CPU slower. Is that worth it to prevent this attack? Discuss on Campus Wire, I guess. And what are some alternate mechanisms that attacks based on the same instructions could possibly utilize? Because we know there are two major weaknesses, and can we exploit it any other way? Bonus question, we can answer it right now here in class. You convinced to buy AMD now?
Raise of hand, who has an AMD CPU?
Yep. And yeah, just the papers that were used in the future work. And any questions?
How many people are using an AMD CPU in this class?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Is there a 10th one?
I'm using this attack on everyone who doesn't have their hands raised.
So 10 out of what? How many people approximately do we have in the class now? 30?
I counted 11.
11 out of what? 40?
Who has Intel? Who has Intel? Raise your hand if you have Intel.
1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah.
The latest CPU they cited was like Intel like 9th generation, so if you have anything after that, that's probably okay.
Yeah, I think I saw a 10th gen in there.
Or 10th gen,
yeah.
okay.
All right, cool. Any other comments? Perfect. Thank you, guys. That was a great presentation. Appreciate all the future works as well. All right, so we're gonna have a quick break, maybe until 3:05, and then we're gonna come back and do the next three. So the remaining ones will be on defenses, so a little bit more positive. I'm also staying around. If you have any questions, just come to the microphone and ask questions during the break. Otherwise, we're gonna start at 3:05. I'm gonna pause the recording for now. Okay, go ahead, guys.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, just one quick note so that the rest of these papers going to be about defenses, as I said. We're going to have two more after this. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, now speaking, we're going to embrace the defense instead of those horrible attacks. So hello everyone, we are group 2.1 and we are talking about the Kestrel cache, which is preventing cache attacks with time-based evictions. And I'm Yulong Zhou, my teammate is Huning. So first of all, it's the problem that we are facing. As we all know, the attacker can measure how long a program takes to execute and infer whether some data was cached so that he can get some information from this process. So however, since the very design goal of the cache is to accelerate the slow access to the main memory, so the time inside channel cannot be mitigated without losing those crucial performance.
come from the cache. So there are some existing solutions, but they can only optimize certain aspects. They often have some issues like performance overhead or some increased latency. So what we need is an architectural solution that can defend against such attacks with some minimal impact on the system performance. Here's some background. There's two common defense strategies have been proposed. The first is cache partitioning, which split the cache into multiple isolated domains, and we can get some security for those different security domains. But there are some limitations. The first one is it only offers only one-way protection. And the second is either dynamic or static cache partitioning have some limitations. And the second way is index randomization. But there's a new type of attack called prime, clone, and poke. This attack can still find some effective set through extensive testing and proving. So through this way, as long as the attacker can observe some partial conflicts, they can recover some sensitive information from the cache. Here are some research works related to this topic. For example, the scatter cache, it used cache state randomization, but it faced a challenge of backwards compatibility on the software side. And the second one is Phantom cache. It used localized randomization, but its lookup latency is increased compared to some to the traditional cache. The third one is the most recent one. It's called Mirage. It used separate text store from data store to construct the cache, but increase overall accuracy latency. So under this background, here comes the solution, which is called Calyptra cache. It's kind of annoying. Okay. It has a clear goal, which is breaking the direct link between cache access and cache evictions. So from our understanding, the most important and critical step is to assign a time to live value. Whenever the TTL expires, the cache line is evicted. So this way, it significantly reduces the conflict-based evictions and makes the cache state observation unreliable for those attackers. As for the other two aspects, for cache mapping, it uses highly randomized address, and for access cache latency, this cache does not affect the critical path, so the complexity is still low. So the latency is not increased seriously. From here, we're going to provide some intuition about how this works. Calyptra cache uses a low latency randomization function that assigns a cache to different weights, like the same color in those 4 weights. So for address A, such a collection of the address is called a dynamic set. But however, until here, it is still a pseudo-random mapping. So to further get this to a true random mapping, it uses ideal key address function. So from the view of attacker, it is indistinguishable from a true random mapping. So in this way, the only observable behavior is to the attacker is when one address causes an eviction of another one. So thus indicating that both addresses collide in at least one cache way.
Yeah, so as we previously mentioned, the time to live value is the core mechanism of this Calyptra cache. So here's how it works. So when a cache line is loaded, first it will be assigned a random time to value initial value that is within a certain range that has a uniform distribution. And after that, the time to live value will decrease to a certain rate, and the rate is called RTTL, the rate of time to live. And when the cache hits, it will refresh its time to live value. So refresh its time to live value so that it can stay valid. And otherwise, with enough time, the certain line will be free when its time to live value expires, or if the cache is full and get randomly replaced by a certain other memory, a load from the main memory. And the rate of time to live is also dynamically adaptive itself dynamically. So as you can see here, the rate of time to live will increase over time. And whenever it sees a conflict-based eviction, will increase significantly. In the paper, it will double itself. And a bigger time to live value means a faster overall expiration for all the cache lines. So this process can help against the prime and probe process of the attacker. Because now the attacker, when it's profiling or when it's priming the it needs to avoid possible conflicts. Because if there is a conflict, then the overall rate of time to live will increase. And in this way, all the cache lines will expire sooner. So as a result, either the attacker now has less time for completing all the profiling tasks, or all the cache lines will get expired and needs to start it over again. So in this way, the clepsydra cache can help against the prime process. Okay. So in a paper, paper measured the security property of the clepsydra cache with two main metrics: the caching probability and the eviction probability. So caching probability means like how difficult it is for the attacker to cause an eviction with certain amount of cache being profiled. And eviction probability is like the likelihood of the attacker to evict the target address with a certain eviction set. So for a quick comparison, to reach a 50% eviction probability in the clepsydra cache, the attacker needs to profile 70% of the cache, and it still needs to take more than 1 hour. While in the scatter cache, as mentioned in the background, it only needs about half a second to generate a 50% eviction probability eviction set. So from this, we can say that the clepsydra cache can enhance its resilience against the prime, probe, and probe attack to a great extent. Yeah, so we can also take a quick look at the result from, I think it's from Gen5 simulation. So you can see here the number of the cache conflicts is reduced by around 95% on average, while the overall speed performance overhead is only like 1.38%. So from this, we can suggest that the overall performance overhead for this clepsydra cache is low, while it can reduce. It can increase its resilience to the prime and probe attack quite to a great extent. So that is the main content of this paper, and we have identified 2 points that can have further discussion. First is like for the RTTL fading function. So in the paper, the author just simply gives a linear decreasing function, which is something like RTTL prime equals RTTL minus 1. So we think that there might be an optimal fading function for the RTTL because this can helps the clepsydra cache to control the speed of how those cache lines should expire. And this is one of the discussion point. And the second is the hardware complexity. So I think in this paper, actually, it does not explain clearly about the hardware implementation of this clepsydra cache. So it states that the area overhead is only about 8%. But this 8% actually excludes the storage capacitor here, and the storage capacitor needs to occupy like maybe half the size of the cache, right? So we think that the area overhead of this architecture will be a lot greater than the 8%, and also a large capacitor will introduce greater energy consumption. So I think maybe the energy consumption and the hardware area overhead is something that needs to further discuss this way. Yeah, that's all of our presentation. Thank you.
Do you have any questions about maybe have any point for our questions? The hardware complexity or the detail optimization? No? Okay, that's all.
All right, thank you guys. Can we have the next group?
He said it.
Did you just say 3 subject?
You can start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I don't know about. Yes, that's right. That's not. So terrible. Oh, yes.
Okay, hello everyone. Today we'll be presenting the paper Mirage, Mitigating Conflict-Based Cache Attacks with a Practical Fully Associative Design, which is paper T2.2. So the main problem with many existing cache side channel defenses involving randomization techniques to change mappings before an eviction set can be found is that they can later down the line be successfully attacked by simply finding the eviction sets faster or more efficiently, leading to a sort of cat and mouse game where to combat attacks, a new remapping scheme like Caesar shown here, which is touched on briefly in lecture, is introduced to defend against existing attacks. But soon after, new attack techniques are found that can then find the eviction sets even faster. So then because as well, as was described before in lecture as well, many cache side channel attacks critically rely on setting up an eviction set in shared cache and inferring information from set conflicts that arise. So a surefire way to put an end to this arms race would be to eliminate the possibility of set conflicts entirely. One way to do so would be to partition and completely isolate portions of the shared cache such that they can only be accessed by certain processes with techniques such as the chunked cache approach mentioned previously in lecture, but with some such techniques significantly cutting down cache sizes available to individual processes. Doing so can significantly lower performance, especially for regular applications that don't need such a high level of security. So what Mirage seeks to do instead is to eliminate set conflicts entirely or virtually entirely, limiting their probability to levels so low as to occur only once in an amount of time greater than the lifetime of the universe, while maintaining the benefits of sharing the last level cache. Mirage does this by providing the abstraction of a fully associative design where evictions occur randomly from across the entire cache. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the authors of this paper implement and achieve this.
So yeah, before going to the Mirage actual, how is that implemented, I'll start with a very basic bucket and ball problem. Let's just consider there are 4 buckets and each bucket has a size of 4, and then there are some infinite number of balls that are coming. Each of these balls can randomly go to any of these buckets, and then once it is filled, it's an overflow. So consider this as a very baseline thing. Now let's say we modify this whole issue into some other where each bucket size, let's say, is increased from 4 to 8, and then again the balls, each incoming ball now, instead of having one option, will have 2 options. It will randomly choose 2 buckets, and then whichever bucket has the lower number of balls, it will go into that particular bucket. Now, just consider that the original size being 16, if the total number of balls in any like the sum of all the balls here exceeds 16, we just randomly pick a bucket and then just remove any of the balls, single ball from that. Just remember this, and then I think that will be very beneficial for you guys to understand the Mirage concept.
Yeah, just a pointer here that in this case, the probability of finding a bucket with unfilled bucket increases super exponentially in the second case. And then we'll build on to that in an understanding of the Mirage design. So yeah, coming to the proposed design, Mirage, which is stands for multi-index randomized cache with global evictions. It is able to completely eliminate set associative eviction such that any eviction happening in the cache is a global eviction. It abstracts a fully associative cache with random replacement without actually having the unimplementable practical overheads of a fully associative cache. So there are 3 major components to this design, and we'll come to each step by step. So the first is it builds on the V-Way cache. It adds pointer-based indirection between the data store and the tag store. Yeah, this is for illustration. So instead of having a direct mapping between the tag store and entries in the tag store and the data store, it is done through pointer-based mapping. And then they also add extra tag storage for each set within the tag store so that the likelihood of finding an invalid tag entry for any incoming line increases. And then in order to have global evictions, they, upon a need requirement for a global eviction, they select any entry randomly. So yeah, any entry is selected randomly. Now, this is still not foolproof because there's still a mapping between the addresses and the tag store, and the attacker can exploit that mapping. So the next step is they split the tag store into two parts, two SKUs, and each of them is available as a choice for the incoming cache line to be stored. And the indexing is done randomly so that it's difficult for the attacker to find that mapping. So basically, we add an additional tag store, a SKU. Each of these has additional storage, tag store storage, and we have randomized cryptographic functions which are used to index into these two tables. But now the critical point is selecting which of these SKUs to load our entry into. So there they introduce this power of two choices indexing, where if you have random indexing, you have two choices, and each, because of random indexing, you expect them to be uniformly distributed. You can follow a load balancing approach so that you select the line which has more number of invalid tags. And if you do that, the probability of finding an invalid tag across all your line installs increases super exponentially. And they say for a 75% extra storage, that is like if you have 8 ways in your tags, 8-way associative cache, and you have 6 extra ways for each set, you are unlikely to have a set associative eviction for 10 to the power 17 years. So they are just able to completely eliminate the possibility of a set associative eviction.
Yeah, coming back to the bucket and balls problem. So consider all the buckets. I mean, just to analyze, just to connect both the things. 4 buckets, consider them as the sets. Balls, consider them as a cache line, and the number of, like the capacity of bucket, consider as the number of ways. So this is a very baseline structure that is what we all study. Is like it's some number of sets. There are 4 ways, and then any cache line will come, go to any of the set, and then fill it. Now there is set conflict comes. That means all the ways are full, and this is what the attacker exploits. Now coming to Mirage, they will increase the tag store as the first time. Here from 4 to 8, we increase the tag store size. The sets remain the same. Now each cache line will have an option to go to 2 different sets. It will choose the set which has lower number of tag store or lower number of balls. And then when the total number of size, that means your whole data is finished. That means the number of data that is 16 is there. You can just select any of the sets and then remove 1 ball. In this way, you will eliminate any of the set conflicts. As she explained, this is super exponentially low. So if you have like number of SKUs or the number of ways, it's more than 6, 8 or 9. It takes up a whole lifetime of instructions to actually have a set conflict. So yeah, to evaluate this, they took up a very baseline of a 16-way, 16 MB last level cache. And in the Mirage, they took this 16-way, divided into 2 of 8 ways each, add a 75%, that is 6 extra caches, and then which is 70%. And then they use the Prince cipher. It's a cryptographic algorithm to select between both the SKUs. They did the simulation on Gem5 and RISC-V, and they implemented on some 29 spec logics. To get to the result, I will explain first this graph.
So as you can see, it's super exponential. As you increase the number of ways per set, so number of ways that you have implemented per skew, if it is more than 12, as you can see, even simulation cannot reach to an SAE, and it's just a pattern that they can see. So they are the Mirage is actually using 14 ways. It takes up 10 to the power 35, which is more than the universe lifetime, to get to an SAE, which is to set associative conflicts. This whole approach took up some 20% extra storage to get that extra tag entry. It was a bit 2% slow, which was also pointed out in the last paper, if you guys remember. It incurs latency because there will be LLC message, and then it has some 20% of increased static power. For future work and discussions, do you guys think is there any other possibility of attack on the Mirage paper? I mean, so Mirage paper is actually till now the state of the art against the set conflict attack based approaches, but it is still vulnerable to attacks which can monitor the cache occupancy such that they can get the working fingerprints of what all websites they are having access. But set conflict based attacks cannot be done with Mirage. So as you remember, so in the Mirage, we globally evict any random cache line from the data. So do you guys think is there any drawback with that, or is there any better eviction method in this instead of just globally removing any randomly? So obviously we are not using an LRU method, we are just removing it globally. So yes, it affects the performance, it affects an LLC message, which is obviously leading to certain latency. But yeah, there is an option of using a pseudo random global eviction, but again, there's a chance of attack that they can actually know the age and then get to know the associative conflicts. So, I mean, till now, as such, they don't have any option. So it's a necessary trade-off that you have to have for security. So, okay, they use a hash function called prince to actually select between both the skews, like not both the skews, but which set to go in each of the skew. So what do you guys think is the necessary choice of what kind of hash function should we use?
Well, as a spoiler, the next paper has an improvement.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so this hash function is the choice of hash function should obviously be faster and it should be secure enough. So normal solve won't work, although it's faster, it's not secure. But if you take up a very complicated hash function, it may take up more cycles. But yeah, so Mirage takes up some 75% extra tags to implement all of this. But is there any other method that you can think of which has a lower number of size and can still give you this kind of results? I mean, if not, so there is something called cuckoo relocation methodology.
This is mentioned in the paper.
Yeah, this is also mentioned in the paper. Because of time constraint, I won't explain this, but if you guys can understand, it's just like if there is a set conflict, all they will do is they will relocate one of the invalid or the valid tags to some other cache line and can still give you a similar kind of result. Although you have to do some fixed number of retries to do that, but it can still give you a 20,000 time to get to the person. Yeah. Any question?
All right, guys, thanks. Since we are kind of over time, let's thanks the speakers and move on to the next one. Thank you, guys. All right, so the last team, not the least, obviously. Feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Great. So today, our paper is SCARF, a low latency block cipher for security cache randomization. And so today we're going to talk about actually a solution to cache side channel attack in modern computer security. So modern CPUs use multi-level caches to make memory access faster, but this also introduces risks. As we discussed in class, attacks like flush reload and prime reload can take advantage of small timing differences between cache hits and misses. Through these attacks, attackers can steal sensitive information like cryptography, keys, user input, and even trigger larger threats like Spectre and Meltdown. Modern CPUs have multiple levels of cache, with the L3 cache shared across all cores. So in these systems, the L3 cache typically contains 2 to the 10 power cache set, meaning the cache index is 10 bit wide. Therefore, there's no need to waste time and hardware resources encrypting a larger block than that. And there are 2 main types of cache attacks. So first one is the flush-based, and the other one is contention-based. So flush-based attacks require shared memory. Contention-based attacks, which the paper focuses on, exploit the cache's set associative structure without needing shared memory. So to defend against these attacks, cache randomization has been proposed. It changes the mapping from memory addresses to cache set, making it harder for attackers to build eviction sets. But the randomization must be extremely fast because it happens every time the CPU accesses the cache and strong enough to resist protection. And however, existing randomization methods have serious problems. Some designs use full block ciphers like Prince, which are too slow for cache lookups. Other designs are too weak and can be broken by attacks like Prime, Probe. So SCARF actually solved these problems by using a lightweight 10-bit cipher with a 48-bit tweak, achieving low latency and strong security. And in SCARF's attacker model, the attacker is quite powerful. They can pick any addresses and run memory operations and observe whether each access is a hit or a miss. They can repeat these many times to find patterns, but there are important limits on what they cannot observe, what they can observe. The attacker cannot see the cache index or the randomization output. The cache behaves like a black box, and they can only infer if 2 addresses collide based on timing. And SCARF defines 2 formal security goals based on these assumptions. The first one is, even if attackers query many address pairs, they should not be able to tell SCARF apart from a perfect random mapping based only on the collisions. Second, even if they simulate encrypt-decrypt chains between addresses, SCARF must still appear random under realistic limits. And let's move on to.
Yeah, so I will introduce the basic idea of the SCARF. So first we imagine like we get an input, virtual address is 64 bits, and we will divide it into 3 parts. One is tag. It's used as quick, which I will get the help in later, and the other is index. So this is the encrypted part. We will use the cache set to instead of this index to keep the security, and another one is offset, which remains unchanged. Also, we will need another key. It's used for generated randomly during boot time using things like, which it's like a real random number, and we have index, tag, and key now, and we will encrypt it with this function and to get a new cache index. With this index, we will write the data into the cache, and also the whole process is inversible, which we need to make sure that we can use get the original index in write back process. So maybe next one. Yeah, and now I will introduce the Vicky schedule. Just to look the formula and to get the main idea is like we will get the 4 group of 60-bit subkeys, and for each round function, we will use 30-bit for each. And maybe next. Yeah, for the round function, we have 8 rounds, and the front 6 is use the RE, and the last 2 we will use R2. And we can see that in each round we will divide the 30-bit key into 6 groups and use this formula to get a new XR and XL. And the original XR and XL is the 10-bit index. We divided into 2, and each round we updated, and finally we will get our new index. Yeah, and so this is the combination of each round graph, and we will see the right line is the critical path, which means that the X function will not infect the latency, and the advantage is for the 10-bit it's very small and easy, so it's very fast, and also we have strong no linear because the S function as the no linear, and still because we have 2 round function R1 and R2, it anti the round cancellation, because if we all use the same for example R1, we will find that maybe there will be 2 results. The result of their multiplication will be identity. So it's very dangerous. And also the low latency and the fully reversible is the basic idea of this function, maybe in the next. Yeah.
Based on previous design, the paper evaluated both the security and efficiency of SCARF. In terms of security, it applied 4 classic cryptanalysis methods: differential, integral, statistical, and meet-in-the-middle attacks. These are standard techniques used to break symmetric ciphers and test controllability of input differences, diffusion speed, randomness of output, and key separation. The results shows that SCARF does not leak any useful information, even under extensive guessing. So therefore, it largely satisfies the 2 previously defined security requirements. For efficiency, SCARF was synthesized using Synopsys design compiler on both 45 nanometer and 15 nanometer technology nodes. According to the figure shown above, we can see that SCARF achieves lower latency and smaller hardware area compared to other low latency ciphers like Prince, Mantis, and Karma. Furthermore, the team ran real-world benchmarks using the Parsec suite to see how SCARF affects full programs. And in all the tests, we can see that SCARF either matched or outperformed Prince in terms of runtime overhead, and the differences stayed within 1%. This suggests that integrating SCARF does not noticeably slow things down. As for future work, we could explore stronger cryptanalysis, including related twig and algebraic attacks, to further assess SCARF's resilience. And it would also be valuable to implement SCARF on actual hardware platforms like FPGAs and RISC-V chips to evaluate its performance under realistic timing, area, and power constraints. Additionally, since the design is both compact and tweakable, it could be adapted for broader use cases like on-chip memory encryption, secure boot mechanisms, and lightweight end-to-end IoT encryption, IoT networks, where latency and resource budgets are highly constrained. And that's all. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
So for those applications, how much of the advantages are lost once you use once the block size is more than 10 bits? Any 10-bit messages, and if you chain it, something else with over IoT would be slower.
Sorry, so you just asked for the 10-bit?
I'm asking more about the other adapting or to the other applications. It's with a 10-bit block size pose an issue for a bunch of other things we like to send larger messages without having to encrypt as many times.
Maybe it's just compatible to the 10 bits cases, because it's specially designed for that case.
It is specially designed for a computer GPU, so. Yeah. Because there are lots of different kinds of method in the dispatch, so the order they just specific to one special kind
I
of.
think that I understand, but think about the case where you have to get to IoT communications. I mean, in that case, you would want a larger block size.
Yeah, maybe in that case, you need to define another. Yeah.
This is like
How much of the advantages are lost by making that adapt?
you mean make it like
Think,
bigger?
I guess we might want, more. For this, then we have, saying how much of the low latency and storage properties would hold with a larger block size.
I think they didn't specify like how much, like if you increase by certain bit. But like overall, like if you want to add more, it will. Like if you want to add more and transfer more data, it would like make this process slower. But like in the paper, it doesn't say like, because they didn't run like other tests. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that I understand, though, I think at that point, why would you not use print?
Really, I think, sorry, for the hardware part, the key point is like they use.
Hertz, then we need more bits. I mean, then.
Like you mean disadvantages of print? Or?
But for the other applications where we need a larger block size, twice or better option than prints. That's the IoT communication.
This is the basic design. Yeah. So if you want to add more bits, you need to change this one, right?
So adaptation is possible, but not.
Yeah.
I think it might be limited to like application, because some IoT in IoT you have like lots of all kinds of applications, and it is suitable for like a lower, like a lighter application, like when you are working on like a heavy their service or something else, like you might want to switch to something else. Because the goal for this is low latency and more secure. But like but because we have only limited bits, like there are trade-offs, because there is impossible to find something that is good for that is low latency and secure, and you can do like lots of job, like because that's something maybe people can work in the future, but for this technique, like there are trade-offs. Like does it answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.